Thank you to Liberty for your participation as a sponsor and definitely as a leader and growing innovator in Missouri. It's been a pleasure to work with you over the years. Our next session is really exciting. Full disclosure, MEI has been involved in the design and development on the back end to support these entities here in all the hard work that they're doing. And so we're a little biased in what they're trying to do and the good work they're beginning to do. But with that, I am really excited to bring to you this panel of presenters to talk about building energy efficiency policies and the energy resource hubs that are being created specifically in Kansas City and St. Louis. What they are, what they're going to do, who they're working with, how you can work with them. A lot of great stuff to come, and we're just at the tip of that iceberg. And we couldn't think of anyone else better to share it than a leader in the community in the Kansas City area with so much work that they're doing there. But that's Kristen Riat, the Executive Director at Bridging the Gap. She's going to moderate this session for us and lead this great conversation of panelists. Thank you all so much. Kristen, I will hand it over to you. Kristen, you're on mute if you are talking. Okay, sorry, our technical difficulties here. Just give us one moment.
Can you hear me, Josh?
There we go. Yes.
Okay, so sorry. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry for that little blip. I'm Kristen Riat. I'm Executive Director at Bridging the Gap. Thank you for that kind introduction. And I'm excited to introduce our topic today. Before I do that, let me just mention one or two things about Bridging the Gap that are germane, because I'll be asking some questions related to them at the end of the session. Bridging the Gap is involved in energy and water efficiency in both the residential sector, where we install energy and water saving devices, particularly in lower income households, but also in the commercial and industrial sectors where we do outreach for Evergy. So we do have experience with the whole question of kind of the human psychology of embracing energy efficiency, and I'll refer to that a little bit later. Want to mention one other thing, which is that we're involved in urban trees, which also play a very powerful role in energy efficiency. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing three very knowledgeable panelists who will discuss how cities are reducing energy use in buildings. And they're, as Josh said in the intro, they're creating energy resource hubs, they're passing new performance standards, and lots more that you're going to hear about it. After the introduction, we're going to actually hear from all three speakers sequentially, and then we'll have a question and answer session at the end. So it's my pleasure first to introduce you to Emily Andrews, who's the Executive Director of the U.S. Green Building Council Missouri Gateway Chapter. And Emily joined the Missouri Gateway Chapter of USGBC as its first full-time person in 2006. And she has grown the organization now to 3 full-time staff and many active volunteers. And prior to that, she managed the St. Louis Community Air Project, which was an EPA-funded project to promote healthier air quality in the community. She also serves on several boards, the Forest Park Advisory Board, the City of St. Louis's Clean Energy Development Board, and she co-chairs the One St. Louis Energy and Emissions Working Group. Also, second to speak will be Mary English, who is the Building Performance Program Manager at Metropolitan Energy Center. And she's currently expanding their Energy Solutions Hub, which will be a full service resource for the region to help retrofit and construct energy efficient buildings. Prior to working for MEC, Mary had her own business. She was conducting energy assessments, testing, consultation. She's very, very experienced in the field of building performance in both the residential and commercial sectors. Outside of that work, she currently serves on the programs committee for USGBC's Central Plains chapter, and also the equity committee for Climate Action Kansas City. And then our third panelist will be Ashley Sadowski, whose commitment to community well-being and forging collaborative partnerships is exemplified in her new role as the executive director of Kansas City's first Building Energy Exchange. She works closely with private and public agencies, with Climate Action KC, Mid-America Regional Council, and many others to support the real estate community in reaching carbon neutrality by 2040. Ashley is also an architect and spent 14 years managing the design and construction of several $1 million worth of community assets, including affordable housing projects, urban redevelopment, and parks revitalization. She's also currently sitting on the City of KCMO's Planning Commission. So these three are obviously very knowledgeable with a lot of different depth of experience. And it's my pleasure to introduce the three of them. So panel, please take it away.
Okay, hi, I'm Mary. I think I'm first up to introduce myself, if you wouldn't mind going to the introduction slides. Okay, well, we're going to do some introductions, and then each one of us are going to sort of play past the mic with talking about our different policies and services in our metropolitan areas. Next slide, please. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Metropolitan Energy Center, we're an almost 40-year-old non-for-profit in the city of Kansas City, Missouri, in the region. We were formally incorporated in 1983, and to further the mission of promoting energy efficiency and outreach for loans and information in the neighborhoods of the urban core of our city. Just a few highlights since our incorporation. We have two divisions, transportation and the building sector. And in 1998, the U.S. Department of Energy formally named our Clean Transportation Program as one of their 83 national Clean Cities coalitions, giving MEC access to federal resources to advocate for alternative fuels in Kansas and Missouri. In addition to that, in 2013, the Central Kansas Clean Cities program was born out of the Kansas City Regional Clean Cities program. And with the unique mission of addressing the energy needs and economic concerns, which are unique to rural communities in the state of Kansas. And as a result, that's given us the knowledge and resources to do similar things if need be in the state of Missouri. We are currently expanding, as Kristen already said, to expand our services this year and establishing the Energy Solutions Hub for the region to be a resource to push for energy efficiency on a broad scale in the region across both residential and commercial sectors. And I want to thank Kristen for being here, and also a thank you to MEI and my fellow panelists for having me join the conversation today. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. And with that, next slide and next introduction.
Mary, I am Ashley Sadowski. I am the newly appointed Executive Director of the Building Energy Exchange here in Kansas City. We were established in early 2021 as the first major initiative of Kansas City's Regional Climate Action Plan, which I'll discuss in a moment, a little more about that plan. But the purpose of the Building Energy Exchange is to promote resources of our local and national partners, including the organizations that sit on this panel, and really tie in closely with what the gaps are in technical and financial execution. As we all know, and many of the folks in this audience are well aware, there's a lot of folks in this space. We are really looking to find key initiatives to fill gaps, to truly move the market towards energy efficiency. We work with a number of national partners, including the Building Energy Exchange in New York, which has been around for about 10 years and doing this kind of work for that region. The Institute for Market Transformation in DC, which also has a building innovation hub. NYSEG, which is the nation's first green bank, and one of the few city-run green banks. NRDC, which we are fortunate to have one of the leading energy economists of NRDC here locally in the Kansas City area, and is helping us form up our organization. ULI Kansas City is working with us on some programming opportunities. And last but not least, Elevate Energy, which has a deep portfolio of work around technical assistance and concierge work, particularly in communities that are utility burdened. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we were formed out of the Climate Action Regional Plan, and this was a really ambitious effort over the last couple of years in combination with Climate Action KC, which is our parent organization to our work, in the Mid-America Regional Council. And they brought together over 150 elected leaders and over 1,000 volunteers, involvement with folks like Marriott, MEC, and others, to develop a whole host of solutions for climate mitigation. But as it relates to the decarbonization of buildings, it sets out net zero emissions for all public buildings by 2035, net zero for all buildings by 2040, and net zero economy-wide by 2050. So this is a big policy directive that informs our work. And the hope is that this regional plan in the coming months and years trickles down to other municipal plans in our region and ultimately changes policy direction. I'm going to pass it over to Emily, who's going to speak about St. Louis and has quite a bit of a difference in terms of their policy framework that informs their work.
Thanks, Ashley, and thanks everyone for being here today, and thanks Mary and Kristen for kicking us off. It's exciting to talk a little bit about the work that is going on in St. Louis, and we're kind of moving in the opposite direction. So we heard, that Climate Action KC is taking a regional approach that they hope to trickle down. In St. Louis, we've got this hyper-local approach with the city of St. Louis that we hope to trickle up, I guess is the better way to say it. But so the city of St. Louis passed some building performance standards in 2020. This was passed unanimously by the Board of Aldermen, which was pretty amazing, I think. In addition to existing benchmarking requirements, as well as solar ready and EV charging ready requirements, those all kind of passed within the last several years. Then the city followed with this building energy performance standard. And at the time that this passed, we were the first city in the Midwest to pass this sort of legislation and the fourth jurisdiction in the country. So I feel like if we can do it in St. Louis, we can do it everywhere. And this standard, the Building Energy Performance Standard, which we call MEPS, is the acronym we've been using. So if you hear me say that, that's what I'm referring to. It requires buildings that are 50,000 square feet and greater to meet a targeted energy use intensity, or EUI, and they have to meet that by 2025. So that targeted EUI is basically the building performance standard, and it's based on local benchmarking data and specific to building type. So that K through 12 schools are all meeting the same EUI versus office buildings versus not manufacturing, but warehouses or something like that. And then 65% of buildings that are covered by the ordinance will have to make improvements depending on where they fall in that, in terms of that EUI. Next slide. So this performance standard is really what's driving our work to stand up a building energy exchange in St. Louis. We'd previously been calling it an energy resource hub. So interchangeable sometimes. You can use those terms interchangeable. But as Kristen mentioned in the introductions, I'm the executive director of the U.S. Green Building Council, Missouri Gateway chapter, and we're kind of incubating this program in St. Louis. We've been around for 20 years doing education and advocacy around green buildings. And in the past several years, we've been working really closely with the city of St. Louis on their energy efficiency efforts, specifically benchmarking and BEPS. And when BEPS passed, I heard from a lot of folks that St. Louis should have an energy resource hub, similar to the one in New York, the Building Energy Exchange, similar to the Building Innovation Hub in DC. And that's kind of how we got to where we are today. We're working with a lot of the same partners that Ashley included on her slide, the Institute for Market Transformation, the Natural Resources Defense Council, and the Building Energy Exchange New York have all been really helpful technical advisors throughout this process. They bring really a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table. We're also excited to have local partners on board, Ameren, Missouri, Spire, and Washington University, and we really look forward to engaging more local organizations and companies, and across the whole board. So next slide goes back to Mary.
Thank you so much, Emily. Okay, so these may be obvious, but in a summer of successive dramatic climate-related headlines, I'd like to review a few relevant problems that we can address immediately. Number one, our cities and building stocks are in general aging, inefficient, and as a result, are not nearly up to the task to shelter people from our new normal of extreme weather events in health, in affordability, and in comfort. This is a problem, and I'll get into that perhaps a little bit later. Secondly, the real estate market and system is not conducive to prioritizing high performance buildings today as it stands. There are a number of reasons for this. That would be a separate presentation, so I'm not going to get too much down into the weeds. But one example, market rate apartments are booming here in Kansas City, market rate construction. And there's not much affordable housing being built or renovated as a result. And also, one offshoot of this is there's not much incentive to pause and upgrade our efficiency requirements in general in our city currently, or hasn't been to date. This means things are, we have an equity issue, and inequity means solutions are not going to be a one size fits all. For example, roughly 50% of Kansas City, Missouri residents are renters and may feel powerless to do much about their household environments. So we need to take an equitable approach. And next slide, please. It also needs to be collaborative, just like the three of us here representing different organizations today. Excuse me, Kristen as our moderator. We're here to present ideas to confront these issues, of course. And I want to say up front that any major solutions are going to need to be tackled collaboratively and cooperatively if we're going to be able to take on the global heating crisis head on. We need to be, no pun intended, acting efficiently amongst each other so we can be as productive as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. So MEC in the Kansas City region is here to offer solutions on many fronts. But today I want to speak about our policy-based initiatives. First and foremost, we are contracted with the city of Kansas City, Missouri to increase compliance with the 2016 benchmarking ordinance. MEC is here to help facilitate the private building owners' compliance and will therefore be not only helping private building owners and operators to actually benchmark with their utility information into Energy Star Portfolio Manager annually. We want to be that resource to make it easy for our private industry to, comply with this ordinance. But then once they're benchmarked, we're going to be offering this concierge service to upgrade their buildings once they start measuring what their actual energy use is. So this concierge service will connect the dots between owners and operators, resources for information, and then contractors to do the work, energy assessments, modeling, and so on and so forth. This is going to require multiple approaches. For example, commercial businesses will be approached with a different tool set than, say, multifamily residential structures, because again, we need to be taking an equitable approach, and we need to be reaching folks that traditionally maybe haven't been involved in this conversation and process, so we can fulfill the American dream for more people and residents in town. Next slide, please. On a couple of other policy initiatives, MEC is hoping to take leadership initiative this year. We're going to be a growing resource for all municipalities in the Kansas City metro area as they look to upgrade code. While we attempt to lead this effort, we will be doing several things. We'll be promoting the business and humanitarian cases for energy upgrades. So this is not a zero-sum game, for lack of a better term. We can put people first while also maintaining economic stability. Change is inevitable. I'd say change is here. We can't avoid it, but we can be proactive and enact a prosperous, equitable, and healthy future for as many humans as possible in our region. This will mean that MEC will need to provide training and implementation for codes departments and contractors. So in other words, we don't want to just be like, hey, upgrade your codes and then bye-bye. We want to be a resource to enable the sea change that must happen in our economies here. And finally, I want to highlight one last thing here. A couple of things we need. We feel promotion of the healthy housing will be a key focus as MEC launches a new task force in partnership with Children's Mercy Hospital and other key partners. Our goal, again, is to be connecting the dots between businesses and residents that need resources to achieve healthier, affordable, and more comfortable home. And finally, to reiterate, we will be cooperating fully and completely as we can with other entities like the Building Energy Exchange here in town as well. You know, like they mentioned, I was a volunteer involved with the Climate Action Plan too. And that cooperation is going to be key to go full bore on these action items. And with that, next slide and next panelist.
Unmute myself. All right. So like I mentioned earlier, we really, as a new organization, want to fill the gaps of the existing resources we have in this ecosystem. And so I'm going to talk today about a couple initiatives that we are in the process of launching this year. So the first is the Energy Efficiency Investment Fund. This is a concept that won't be of a surprise to many of you, but we had many conversations that sort of bolstered the need for this idea of providing new financial tools and broadening financial tools to move the marketplace towards higher efficiency. We just wrapped up a really robust needs assessment that involved interviews, one-on-one interviews with close to 60 to 70 people, in addition to kind of surveying a number of folks, and really this their responses just reiterated the need to find other financial mechanisms to support the industry, and specifically support it in places that have been underserved in the past, including prioritizing low to moderate income communities and affordable housing. So this investment fund is in partnership with NRDC and LISC here in Greater Kansas City. It is a regional fund that will pool public, private, and philanthropic capital. It will offer lending products that will facilitate energy efficiency design and retrofits. And like I mentioned, it will, as Mary had mentioned, it is important to all of our organizations that we prioritize social equity. And so in the case of this, we want to prioritize low to moderate income communities and affordable housing as one of our first potential applicants and demonstration projects for this kind of work. This is not a new concept. You know, an energy efficiency investment fund is sometimes as it's referred to. Sometimes it can be interpreted as a green bank. There's over 21 green banks in 16 states and DC that have been launched over the past 10 years. Those green banks have had over $1 billion spent with $7 billion of total investment. So this isn't a new concept by any means, and it's a regional approach that would apply to both the Kansas and Missouri jurisdictions. We are having a number of conversations with both municipalities and counties. And as we all know, there's quite a bit of federal funding that's flowing to them recently and will continue to flow for infrastructure investments. This is one other piece of that infrastructure, is to support the retrofitting of our aging building stock and to move us towards a lower carbon footprint for our region. Next slide. So the next initiative that we're focused on is workforce development. This is also a key part of this ecosystem, is not just providing the financial tools, but once projects are underway, making sure that the workforce is equipped with the skills to execute on high performance buildings, and making sure certain communities that have often not been included in these types of workforce development be included in this process. And so we were recently awarded a grant through the Kauffman Foundation to establish a 3-year contractor accelerator. And we're working with a number of amazing partners, including Elevate Energy, Emerging Builders, Seed Collective, and Business Services Collective, many of whom have experience in this space already. And we are focused on DBE or aspiring DBE startups, disadvantaged business enterprises in the construction industry. We really want to connect entrepreneurs with energy performance training. But in addition, just thinking of them as a larger opportunity than beyond just the skills training, is that we connect them to networks and we connect them to professional development opportunities as well. So these are 2 initiatives that we see as key drivers towards some of the pain points that we've seen and heard from the needs assessment that we were recently undergoing, and really feel like these are 2 ways that we can support the larger ecosystem from all of these groups. Next slide. I'm going to pass it over to Emily.
All right, I'm gonna pick up from here and just talk a little bit more about what we're planning in St. Louis with the Building Energy Exchange. We are a little bit behind Kansas City. They've hired Ashley on board and she's hit the ground running. And I am excited to be interviewing next week for the director position, which means I can stop doing 2 jobs after we bring someone on. But we are we're looking at a lot of the same things that they're looking at in Kansas City, and I expect that you'll see a lot of the same things happening, with the Building Energy Exchange in St. Louis. But really, I do want to just take a minute to acknowledge that we did publish a business plan earlier this year for the Building Energy Exchange, and we had funding through the Energy Foundation. It was part of the American Cities Climate Challenge, which St. Louis has been participating in, and that's supported through Bloomberg Philanthropies. And we're really grateful to MEI for leading the work on that business plan. They had support from Energy Resources Group and Susan Leeds, and they did a ton of stakeholder engagement locally. Last fall, they reviewed the national and international landscape of similar organizations and programs. And while we know that there are a lot of organizations and initiatives that are working on energy efficiency, renewable energy, and climate protection in St. Louis, there is not really a central hub for this work in relationship to the built environment and buildings. So that's kind of where we see the Building Energy Exchange playing a unique role. Next slide. As I mentioned, I think we're going to see a lot of similar programmatic elements between what's happening in Kansas City and what's happening in St. Louis. And that's one of the cool things about this project, is that we've had the opportunity to collaborate with BX Kansas City and kind of share ideas and share some of the resources that are coming down from the national level. And I think there's a lot of great opportunity for that going forward that will benefit not just Kansas City and St. Louis, but the entire state of Missouri, hopefully. So we'll be pulling together information and resources for building owners and operators that are interested in pursuing high performance building updates. We're already working on drawing down and adapting resources from the DC Innovation Hub, which is managed by the Institute for Market Transformation. They actually have a grant from the Lowenstein Foundation to support the startup of the building energy exchanges in Kansas City and St. Louis. So that's been super helpful. They have this great set of step-by-step checklists for different building professionals. So architects, engineers, contractors, commercial tenants, owners, property managers, tenants. And it's really meant to support the implementation of the building performance standard in DC. So there's a lot of parallels between what we see a need for in the marketplace in St. Louis in terms of helping people understand the performance standard, but also understanding how their profession can help elevate building performance and prioritize energy efficiency. So it's not just the building owners that need to be focusing on this, it's everyone, it's the whole landscape of people that serve those building owners, including including the tenants. This is a very large problem we need all hands on deck to solve. So one of the things that we also heard about educational events through the stakeholder interviews is that there are already a lot of educational events locally. But Ashley talked about filling gaps. How can the building energy exchange serve to elevate existing opportunities and work with groups like USGBC, or Ashley mentioned ULI, or others to determine where those gaps are. So maybe there's a gap in education and knowledge about improving building envelopes. Well, BX could create a session on that, or we could work with ASHRAE and the Building Enclosure Council. Did you know that there was one of those things? To develop that kind of education. There's a lot of knowledge out there in the industry that I think we can leverage to move things forward. Next slide. So the service that seems to be most in demand locally, especially as it pertains to the city's building energy performance standard, is a concierge service or some sort of one-on-one assistance to building owners and managers in the process of making efficiency updates to their buildings. So we heard that from the stakeholder engagement, but I personally hear that on a regular basis from people in the city that are working on this implementation, from the board that oversees the implementation of MEPS, from the Affordable Housing Commission in St. Louis and Affordable Housing Advocates, and just a lot of other people. So there are a lot of ways that we can look at this, and we haven't really drilled down on the details of what everything is going to look like in St. Louis. Remember, I'm still in the process of hiring someone, but we do know that it's important and that it needs to be a priority. So that's something, we're going to put kind of on the front burner as we move forward. And I think one of the things I like to remind myself of and others of is that it's important in offering this sort of service that we don't end up competing with professionals, because these are our members and our supporters, and we want them to succeed and thrive as local businesses. So we want to use the Building Energy Exchange and its programming to build the market for energy efficiency services, and then focus the work of the concierge service on the underinvested sectors like nonprofits or affordable housing or buildings that may not have professional facility management staff, to help those folks with the more one-on-one hand-holding that we think a concierge service will offer. So going forward, I think we'll probably be really immediately prioritizing the buildings in the city of St. Louis that are the lowest performing, that have to comply with the Building Energy Performance Standard, because ultimately we want BEPS to be successful. We want buildings to make improvements and to meet that standard and to see those savings and see the benefits of energy efficiency. We don't want people throwing up their hands and paying a fine. Right? We want to see success with this. And that's really what the Building Energy Exchange is about at this point, is really providing that support so we can be successful with BEPS. And we really need to be successful because we want to show the rest of the country that this can be done, and we want to build momentum in our own broader region to move the needle on efficiency and climate change. With that, I think we're wrapped up and ready to take some questions. Oh, We should also just acknowledge our funders here with this slide as well, which I think they've all been mentioned at this point. So.
Well, thank you all for those presentations. I'm learning, even though I've practiced with you and everything else, I continue to learn from what all of you are doing. I'm still having some technical issues and I can't really see the chat. So I'm going to ask Josh to help me with that. But I thought I would warm us up for the Q&A portion of our presentation with a few questions that are specifically geared to each of our three panelists. And if you don't mind, I'll start with you, Emily. I think one of the distinctions that you've made that I think is important is the preponderance of existing buildings that we have. So even though we're updating building codes, it may be some years for those who are actively building new buildings to actually make a large scale impact on what's happening with energy efficiency, simply because there are so many existing buildings. And I know that you have a passion for this. Could you talk to us a little bit about the existing building owners and how they're reacting to the measures that you've taken in St. Louis? What kinds of incentives are there for them to participate? What kinds of enforcement is there for the new measures that you all have taken?
Yeah, so I mean, the reaction, it kind of runs the gamut. You know, there are a lot of people who are really excited about the potential of the building energy performance standard. I think there are some people that see it as a burden on an industry, the building industry, that's already pretty heavily regulated. So we're trying to, you know, make sure that, you know, through programs that the Building Energy Exchange will offer, but also, you know, prior to standing this up, USGBC has been providing a lot of education and support for those, like Mary was talking about, helping people with benchmarking. We've been doing that, you know, since the legislation passed in St. Louis. I can't count the number of benchmarking 101 sessions that I've delivered, and just really meeting with people in front of a computer, you know, pre-pandemic or over Zoom now, to kind of walk them through the process of benchmarking. So having that support available, both through nonprofit organizations like USGBC, but also the city of St. Louis runs the benchmarking and MEPS out of their building division. And so they have a full-time staff person and a couple other you know, people who provide support as well with benchmarking and can answer questions, and just they've been really great about making sure that they have support available in the building division to building owners. That also comes with a whole, you know, like staff of building inspectors, right? That can also provide. They're not providing detailed support, but they can do a little bit of outreach as well when they're working with building owners and operators. So there's been a lot that the city has been able to do there. Actually, as part of the Building Energy Performance Standard, they also included in that ordinance that a new Office of Building Performance would be created in the building division. And they're hiring right now to bring people on board to provide that support. So so that's been really great, because, you know, Mary mentioned, you know, sometimes we pass legislations and move policy forward without the accompanying support that it needs to be successful. And I think that's what a lot of what this panel is all about. It's like, we want the policy because it's really darn important to the future of our planet, but we also need to support people in that process. And then in terms of enforcement, BEPS is new, so you know, buildings have until 2025 to meet it, so we're not in a place with enforcement yet. But there are fines, you know, that the ordinance outlines. With benchmarking, the city has, they also are able to fine buildings for not complying, but I think the bigger stick has been that if you are not compliant with benchmarking, and I think this will be the case with BEPS, you are not eligible to update your occupancy permits.
Oh.
And so you know, that's been a real driver for multifamily housing, one can imagine, or any multi-tenant buildings. But I think, you know, that's been something that they've been able to kind of levy because, again, this the implementation of this work sits in the building division. So.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Mary, my next question is for you, and I'm asking Josh again, if there are questions coming in on the chat, do let me know because I can't see them.
Yes.
Is there one?
No, I said I will. We don't have any yet. Just a reminder,
Okay.
everybody use your chat.
Okay, great. So we'll just keep rolling here. Mary, could you talk about your building codes and specifically barriers that you see to compliance with building codes? My understanding is the 2021 code is quite a bit more rigorous. Is that the case?
Yes, actually, I see that as a good thing. It is in measurement to the 2018 code, almost 10% more robust. The barriers would be maybe education and manpower, woman power too, a term used loosely, to implementing this. But I have to back up and say code plays an increasingly important role because we do need a robust set of rules to combat the growing health problems global heating is now presenting. So there are barriers, but the barriers can be overcome through education, concierge service, training, like Ashley recommended, networking, resources, so we can promote all the training and facilitation we're going to be doing to help codes departments and municipalities implement these new codes, we hope. Back to the issues that code is actually going to be addressing. You know, for example, Denver made news this week as having horrible air quality, among the worst in the world. To quote a local news station in Colorado, Denver's air quality index hovered between 120 and 140 through much of Monday, which is about 4 times the exposure level recommended by the World Health Organization. Earlier this week, to connect the dot, an article in the New York Times pointed out that our buildings are not capable of sheltering humans from these extreme outdoor air quality issues. The fires in Montana, for example, were causing poor indoor air quality as well because of high infiltration rate, AKA building leak rates. Therefore, the indoor air quality was being impacted by this toxic outdoor air quality issue. And we need policy that pushes for well-insulated and air-sealed construction, both in existing and new buildings, with well-designed and installed mechanical ventilation systems to filtrate out these pollutants. So MEC believes this needs to happen at the policy and local level. And we want to identify these barriers. So we're reaching out to municipal governments and communities to understand exactly that, Kristen, what barriers are still in place that we need to help these departments overcome. This shouldn't be scary. This should be seen as a business opportunity, really. Mm-hmm. I mean, upgrading codes is going to positively impact all of our economies by putting in better standards for HVAC equipment and the building envelope and providing jobs to help implement that code.
And I assume that there would be a payback from those measures that would tighten up these buildings substantially for the building owners over the long run. Perhaps Absolutely. The issue, though, is not with the builders themselves, but with the building owners.
Yeah, there is a payback, and the return on investment has always been really great and has been a good incentive, but we might get to that a little bit later as far as incentives go. The return on investment is better than most financial products, but we need more. We need more robust policy.
Thank you, Mary. Ashley, question for you. You've outlined for us what you're doing in 2 areas of solving the whole flow of getting buildings energy efficient. You've talked about making financing available and also making the workforce available. What else do you think is needed? I'm sure that's plenty for you to think about, but if you could think further, what else do you think is needed for businesses to succeed in this energy efficiency drive?
I think it's about just, I've had this conversation a lot because there are tools, and as MEI will talk at length about, PACE is a great one. So if we come up with a number of financial products that supplement the existing ones, I think, that the key is that those are something that people will actually pull the trigger to do. And it shouldn't be assumed that just because you build it, they will come, right? And part of that has a number of reasons. Like one of them is just the perceived maybe brain damage that comes with a new tool and having to apply to it, and maybe even sort of the financial fees that come with it, or overcomplicating your capital stack with other things and other regulations. I've worked a lot in the LIHTC, lower income housing tax credit space for a while, and also historic tax credit space, which is a much more complicated process. And so the first thing people tell me is make it simple, make it easy to access. So that's one piece, I think, is just making it a simple process. But I think it's also just the hand-holding that comes with that. We've mentioned the word concierge, and I think concierge applies not just to the technical pieces of it, but also the financial pieces of it, and making sure people feel comfortable with using it as a tool, and seeing what, possibilities there are for that as a tool. So I would say that's kind of the hand-holding piece that comes along with the product piece is really crucial.
I absolutely agree with that from the work that we've done at Bridging the Gap, that having a person to help you along the journey, because there's so many different stages to energy efficiency. The benchmarking is only the beginning. Then you have to do the building audit, and you choose your projects, and you figure out the financing and all of these things. And to have a friend, if you will, to hold your hand through the process and maybe do a little bit of nagging, friendly nagging can help that along quite a bit. And that kind of sets up the next question, and was a little discussion that the four of us were having when we were preparing for this panel. And I mentioned that our experience at Bridging the Gap is that inertia is one of the most powerful forces at work here, that people are used to doing things the existing way that they're doing them. Energy efficiency is not particularly sexy. You have to go down in the basement, you have to go up in the attic, you have to poke around where the cobwebs are to get to that. It's also a subject that I think has a lot of complexity to it. There are a lot of different ways to make a building make the building envelope tighter. So I feel like all of these things are kind of psychological issues that are working in some sense against us. Ashley, I couldn't agree more with you that having a friend to help you along is going to be a part of breaking that inertia. But do all three of you, do you have other ideas for how, after we build it, we help them come, and we maybe reach out and don't wait for them to come? But what about that outreach to break the inertia?
I can just follow up with another piece that we've talked a lot about. I mentioned the Urban Land Institute as being a partner of ours, and I've done a lot of work with them over the years, and I consider them to be a really great space where thought leadership comes together on all kinds of issues related to planning and development. And I think the conversation we've been having recently with our local chapter is that net zero economy is not part of the local conversation at all, and not part of their initiatives. And there's really a pressure that they're feeling from the national level to make that part of the conversation. And so I think before we can even talk about what all the tools are or the hand-holding, there has to be some level of convening folks together, convening thought leadership together to say, this is the vision and future that we want for our communities. And it's not just about, checking the boxes and getting certain regulations in place, but that this is the overall vision of a net zero economy, and decarbonizing all of our buildings in the region. And I think that's a really important piece, is to get all of those kind of thought leaders on all levels from all facets and inclusive of all different lived experiences to understand that importance and work together for it.
I agree. I think that people want to be part of it. When it is part of the community conversation, they want to be part of what's happening in their community. And I feel like city governments have a big role to play, as they are in St. Louis and in Kansas City, in helping to prioritize energy efficiency as part of the conversation.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Please go ahead.
Okay. That was a great segue into how I've been thinking about this question quite a bit, Kristen. And actually, I feel like I've been walking against that headwind for the entire time since I entered the sustainability construction market. So I've had a lot of time to think about this question. First of all, we are in a market. We're battling for resources amongst other markets and unfortunately amongst each other. So I think we need to think about this question as well because of the urgency. The UN this week released the 2021 IPCC report, which said we are at code red for humanity. So our planet science community is literally jumping up and down, waving their arms at the rest of us to act immediately. I do think that we are capable of reacting to this warning in a positive way. Here's why. Local governments and businesses can start a bold movement. In fact, we already have, as we've been talking about with Climate Action Kansas City and what St. Louis has been doing at the scale of a city. And I think it's going to come down to us at a regional level of cooperation and collaborating to tackle this immediate problem. And a big shout out to St. Louis. I think that mandate to meet the energy efficiency threshold for their buildings of 50,000 or greater is absolutely the best example of what we need to do in Kansas City as well. That is an example of the answer: requirements and bold policy. I do believe that we need to go further and make it easy and be a resource. Again, we can't just implement rules without providing the resources for help. But I have to say, volunteering to do energy efficiency upgrades for the last 14 years, even when the return on investment is better than most financial products, has been still difficult to sell. How about Kansas City has the same requirement as St. Louis? We can have a friendly I-70 rivalry going. The city that reaches the biggest threshold of energy efficiency buildings by a certain date has to buy a round of tickets to the Cardinal Royals game series of said target year. Go Royals. This would be awesome PR for the region. I guarantee that it will be good for our regional economies as long as we, between governments, non-for-profits, associations, and businesses, talk to one another as much and as quickly as possible. This has to be done with an equity focus, declare a regional war on global heating, ramp up a workforce across all sectors of our economy, and pay them an unequivocal living wage. I think we need to switch from a little bit from the competitive side of our natures to the social empathetic side of our brains for a few years and trust one another implicitly to do this. And I think this is the ethical and moral, and I'd say patriotic thing to do. And so that's how I recommend we fight inertia. And as almost a lifelong resident of Kansas City, I think we're up to the task. Thank you for asking that question, Kristen.
Well, I love the idea too of doing more storytelling, if you will, around it, and more sort of media around the successes that people are having. I think that would be very powerful. That's what I'm getting in part from what you are suggesting, Mary. We are actually at time, Josh, a little over time. I know we started a little bit late. Do you want to keep going, or shall we conclude here?
It's really up to you if you've got one or two more questions, but this is the last session, so we'll wrap up as soon as you all are complete.
Okay, great. All right. So I've got one or two others here. What do you guys think that we've learned in the last 10 years? I think all of us have been at this for 10 to 15 years. What have we learned that we should be maybe using as shortcuts into the future? I think for me, part of it has been that we cannot expect that people that demand alone will carry this. We're going to have to push more proactively.
Yeah, I mean, just following on what Mary talked about, you know, we implemented benchmarking in St. Louis, but we weren't necessarily seeing that there was the companion of improvements coming with that, you know, so in those buildings. And so that's kind of what drove the performance standard. But I think like you know, another shortcut that we're taking right now with the Building Energy Exchange is, you know, working with national organizations that have been doing this for 10 plus years. You know, they've I mean, you know, New York started benchmarking 10 years ago, and they just passed a building performance standard. Well, we only started benchmarking in 2017 and passed a performance standard in 2020. We're accelerating this because we're learning from people who have done it, you know, and I think that's how we shortcut some of this, you know, is just like taking what they've done in New York and just copying it throughout the rest of the country. And I know people don't like that in the Midwest, but there's no time to waste anymore, you know, and we do have to take the directives from organizations that are committing to this at the national level. I mean, the Associated General Contractors just, you know, committed to climate action. I never thought I'd see that happen in the time that I've been working in this job, but we've got to trickle that down to our local AGCs, you know. So that's how we start shortcutting things. Is and that's one way to shortcut things. There's probably lots of others. But
Emily, you mentioned New York. Do you want to say anything more about Minneapolis?
That was a different Emily that was making that comment in the
Oh, thank you. Okay.
But it's cool that their health department is enforcing their benchmarking. I actually didn't know that about Minneapolis, but it makes so much sense to tie that in to health. I mean, you know, Mary was talking about it too, and you know, we spend 90% of our time indoors as Americans.
Right.
Like what inside, not just indoors, but inside buildings that have the potential to fight the climate change issues that we're seeing in front of us. So to me, like, this is so inextricably tied together that, you know, building divisions, health departments, everyone working together seems like the way to go.
And she adds to that, they said one letter from the health department usually gets people to comply right away. So yeah. I want to ask you all as just one closing question for myself. I had read not long ago that apartment buildings tend to be the leakiest and least efficient buildings of all of the buildings in the American landscape. And of course, they're also occupied in generally speaking, by the lowest income folks who have unmanageably high utility bill burdens. Anything special that you'd like to say about doing the work in the apartment building world?
I have just one quick note about that, and that is exactly right. I mean, we're trying to resolve that issue. You can make a business case, which we need to do because the system right now, most of the renters are paying their utility bills. That is the most common system. You pay.
Right, the split incentive, right?
Right. But, you know, you can tell the building owners and operators, you can teach them about the money that they can save from less turnover. You know, there are huge amount of turnover among apartment buildings because they're uncomfortable and expensive and just have other issues associated with problems with durability.
Yep.
And you can then, of course, advance the business argument around durability issues too, and maintenance. More efficient are better, cheaper to maintain, for building owners. So I just want to add that. I don't want to monopolize conversation. If Ashley, you have anything to add, because I know you've been in the space quite a bit.
Yeah. I was just going to say, just context for Kansas City, we have a real issue with tenants being able to feel like their rights and their living environment is something that they can control. So there's a lot of advocacy around that space in general. And our health department has been very involved in that as part of a Healthy Homes initiative. But I think to the degree that, you know, in some of those spaces that may be chalked up to a neglectful out-of-town landlord, for example, but there is probably plenty of other examples where the numbers are just not adding up in terms of the amount of utility costs that a landlord is taking on versus some other costs that they're taking on with the upkeep of an aging building. And to the extent that we can come into those situations and provide new systems and new building envelope and other things that would ultimately reduce the utility burdens, make it easier for the tenants to pay their rent as well. And that's sort of a win-win with both the tenants and the landlords. So a lot of folks will, particularly in Kansas City, but in all across the country, are talking a lot about affordable housing and the solutions to which we address affordable housing, to the extent that we can put that in a place of not just about reducing base rent or reducing base mortgage, but reducing overall utility costs. And so that's, I think, a big part of what all of us in this space are passionate about, is like, how can we make energy efficiency people-centric? And ultimately, it's about people. It's not about buildings, which, as we all know, you know, cannot be the sexiest plug for a lot of audiences. But ultimately, it's about building. It's about people and their relationship to their environment.
I wanted to throw out a couple of things that I've been reading lately. One is that the new smart thermostats that require less programming or no programming at all after they're installed can be one of the most powerful interventions in apartment buildings. You don't even have to touch the building envelope yet. You just are using energy more efficiently through that smart thermostat. Anyway, I'll stop there and thank our splendid panel for their wonderful insights into the very, very important aspects of solving the climate change equation with becoming way more energy efficient and right sizing our demand for energy as a nation and as a globe. So thank you all. It's been such a treat to work with you, and I appreciate your dedication and your expertise very much.
Likewise, Kristen, thank you.
Thank you, Kristen, and thank you, Josh and MEI, for having us today.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. Definitely encourage those in Kansas City and St. Louis to keep your eyes and ears open to what's going on here in this topic. Be engaged, help out. A lot of movement going on. Looking forward to it, what happens in the next 6, 12, and 18 months. So thank you all. That concludes our conference for the day. I'd like to thank not only our speakers and our sponsors, but you, the attendees. I know we're over, but I hope it was good content and you found value in it. Tomorrow, we will have a number of great sessions. We hope you'll join us as well tomorrow as you did today. Tomorrow kicks off at 9 a.m. We have distributed energy resources and energy efficiency, diversity, equity, and inclusion in the energy efficiency sector, PACE financing, specifically PACE after COVID refinancing, and more, and closing with power purchase agreements for energy efficiency projects. So a lot more information to come. Thank you again to our speakers, Ashley, Emily, Kristen, and Mary, for our last session, and everyone else. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you tomorrow morning.